My name is Major Rachel Morgan. The morning of my wedding, I didn't receive congratulations from my parents. Instead, I got a single text. You've embarrassed this family for the last time. For them, marrying a mechanic in a dusty Texas town was a disgrace. But in that little chapel, someone else sat in the front row, a man whose existence they buried decades ago. The photo I sent them changed everything. Their silence turned to panic. What they didn't expect was that I'd found the one person who knew all their secrets, and I was finally ready to tell the world. The sun poured gently through the stained glass windows of the tiny chapel, painting fractured ribbons of colour across the wooden pews. The air smelled of old pine, linen and candle wax, a comforting mix of simplicity and ceremony. A hush had settled over the room, punctuated only by the occasional creak of a wooden floorboard as someone shifted their weight. No music played yet, no grand procession had begun. But everyone already knew this wasn't going to be a traditional wedding. There were no politicians, no socialites in pearls and polished shoes. Instead, the pews were filled with soldiers, men and women in dress blues and crisp service uniforms, their medals catching light like silent applause. These were the people who had served beside me, bled beside me, carried me when I was too broken to move. Some still bore visible scars, others carried the invisible kind, but they had all shown up for me. As I peeked out from the small room where I waited, I counted them silently. First Sergeant Carver, he once saved my life in Kabul. Lieutenant Griggs, always too loud, too quick with a joke. Captain Holloway, my first mentor, all here, every last one of them. But 2 seats in the front row remained empty, reserved, untouched, glaring in their silence. My fingers already tight around the bouquet curled tighter. I'd told myself not to expect anything. I'd told myself I wouldn't care. But expectation is a quiet beast. It creeps in, even when unwelcome. My phone buzzed on the small wooden table beside me. I already knew. I picked it up and read the message. Your father is in session. Don't contact us again. You've embarrassed this family enough. That was all. No congratulations. No apology. Not even my name. My mother had sent it. I could tell by the ice in the wording. She always wrote like she was editing a press release, emotionless and perfectly sharpened. I stared at the screen, waiting for a tremor of sadness, a sting of betrayal, but there was only stillness inside me. Maybe because the wound was too old to hurt, or maybe because it had finally scarred over. I placed the phone face down. There was a soft knock. "Mum," came a gentle voice. It was Lieutenant Morris, my maid of honour. "We're ready when you are." I turned to the mirror. My reflection stared back. No makeup except a touch of blush and lip gloss. My hair twisted into a loose braid that fell down one shoulder. The dress was simple, sleeveless, elegant, with a high neckline and no train, practical, soldier-like, me. "Let's do this," I said, softly rising. I walked out alone. The chapel wasn't grand, but it was full. The air felt warm, lived in. My boots echoed softly against the stone floor. A few whispers broke the silence. Then someone stood, and another, until every soldier in the room was on their feet, not out of obligation, but out of respect. At the front, Eli waited. His smile was crooked, nervous, but real. His hands, usually so sure when handling engines and tools, were fidgeting slightly. He looked like a man trying to believe this moment was real. I reached him and took his hand. We didn't exchange vows with grandeur. We didn't need to. The chaplain spoke the words. We said, "I do." And when it was done, there was no roar of applause, only the deep, grounding sound of boots stomping, once unified, like a battle cry turned into a blessing. But just before I turned to walk out with Eli, my gaze swept the front row again. And that's when I saw him, third seat from the aisle. A man I didn't recognise at first. He was older, maybe early 60s, with greying hair and a beard that hadn't been trimmed perfectly. He wore a tweed jacket, slightly too warm for the day, and corduroy pants with scuffed loafers. But his posture was elegant, his presence calm, and his eyes. They were my father's eyes, sharp, pale blue, intelligent, commanding. But unlike my father's, they weren't cold. They were warm, curious, kind. When he met my gaze, he nodded once, almost imperceptibly, but it was the gesture of someone who had been waiting a long time to be seen. A shiver ran down my spine, not from fear, but recognition. He was not a stranger. He was a missing piece. And suddenly the silence from my parents, the rejection, the insult, the abandonment, didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a door closing just before another swung open. The reception was held in the gravel-paved backyard of our company commander's off-base house. Strings of cafe lights crisscrossed above folding tables draped in mismatched linens. The air smelled of slow-cooked brisket, charcoal, and fresh-cut wildflowers placed in old mason jars. A keg of local beer sweated quietly in a corner. Kids played tag near the fence, dodging between combat boots and dress shoes. Someone had brought a Bluetooth speaker, and it hummed low with old country songs. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't polished, but it was real. I stood at the edge of the makeshift dance floor, watching Eli laugh with some of the guys from his garage. His sleeves were rolled up, a beer in one hand, the other on his hip. His smile was easy, free, the kind that made people feel at home just by being near him. This was the man I married, not a political asset, not a trophy, just a man who saw me long before I ever saw myself. Lieutenant Morris tapped my shoulder. "Mom," she said, and her tone told me it wasn't about cake or music. "Your guest, the older gentleman, he's waiting near the side garden." My heart skipped. I found him where she said, standing beside a bush of blooming lavender, hands loosely clasped behind his back. The fading sunlight made his silver hair glow, and as I approached, he looked up, eyes locking onto mine with a kind of quiet familiarity. "Rachel," he said. "Sir," I replied automatically, years of military etiquette surfacing. But he shook his head with a small smile. "You don't have to call me that." I nodded slowly. "Then what should I call you?" "Jonathan," he said. "Or Uncle, if you want." The word hit like a soft blow to the chest. Uncle, a title no one had ever mentioned, a man I'd never known I'd missed until he stood in front of me. I thought I began but trailed off. There was too much to say. He gestured toward the picnic table. "May I take a photo with you?" I blinked. "What?" "I'd be honoured," he said softly. "It would mean a great deal." It was such a gentle request, and yet it carried weight. I nodded, my throat suddenly tight. We gathered Eli, and I waved over Captain Holloway, my old CO. The four of us stood in front of a string of glowing bulbs. I held up my phone, turned it around, and snapped the picture. Click. It was a moment captured in amber, Eli with one arm around my waist, Captain Holloway standing proud, and Jonathan just slightly off-centre, his expression one of calm dignity. There was no pretense, no performance. I stared at the photo for a beat too long. Then, almost without thinking, I opened the group chat labelled Morgan Family. It had been filled for years with press photos, dinner reservations, vacation reminders, my father's statements, my mother's charity updates, Vanessa's curated brunch snapshots. Never once had it reflected my actual life. I didn't write a caption. I didn't explain. I just attached the photo and hit send. For a moment, nothing. I slid the phone back into my pocket and went to refill my drink, my heart strangely calm. Then, 5 minutes later, the buzzing began. Buzz. Victoria Morgan. I ignored it. Buzz. Edward Morgan. I didn't flinch. Buzz. Vanessa. Morgan. Then again. Victoria. Edward. Vanessa. Over and over. I pulled the phone out and watched as call after call tried to come through. The screen was a blur of names, vibrating like a trapped insect in my hand. Eli appeared beside me. "You okay?" I showed him the screen. He raised an eyebrow. "That fast, huh?" "They saw him," I said quietly. "They saw Jonathan." Eli didn't ask why that mattered. He didn't need to. He simply took the phone from my hand, held the side button, and powered it off. The screen went dark. The buzzing stopped. All that was left was the sound of laughter, the clinking of beer bottles, and someone yelling about overcooked ribs. I exhaled deeply. For the first time, maybe in years, my lungs felt like they had space to breathe. It wasn't victory, not entirely, but it was something close. Still, as I looked back toward the lavender bush where Jonathan had stood, now empty, a quiet unease settled in my chest. This wasn't the end of something, it was the ignition, because if one photo could cause that much panic, then there were truths in it they were terrified of, and I was ready to find out why. I was 10, the first time I saw his face, Jonathan's face. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, and I was exploring the attic of our Georgetown townhouse, a space that always felt off limits, despite no one ever saying so. Dust clung to everything like secrets, and the air was thick with the scent of cedar and mothballs. I was looking for an old science kit when I stumbled upon a leather-bound photo album wedged between 2 boxes of holiday decor. Curious, I opened it, flipping past glossy portraits of my grandparents, black and white Christmas photos, and formal family gatherings. But toward the back, a loose photograph slipped out. 2 young men stood in front of a beat-up Ford Mustang, arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning like they owned the world. One was my father, unmistakably. The other was a mirror image. Same sharp jaw, same ice blue eyes, same confident tilt of the chin. Twins. I didn't understand. My father had never mentioned a brother. I bolted downstairs, the photo clenched in my hand like a discovery I was proud of. "Mom!" I shouted, bursting into the living room where she was sipping tea, perfectly poised on the edge of a white settee. She looked up, annoyed, but trying to hide it behind her practiced social smile. "Where did you get that?" she asked, voice tight. "I found it in the attic. Is that Dad's brother?" Her smile vanished. She stood, snatched the photo from my hands with a speed that startled me. "We do not speak of this person," she hissed. She tore the photo in half, then in half again, then again. The pieces fluttered into the wastebasket like confetti made of broken truth. I stared at her, stunned. "But why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her eyes went hard. "Because I said so." She turned her back and sat down, smoothing her skirt as if nothing had happened. I didn't ask again, but something shifted in me that day. It was the first time I realized there were things I wasn't allowed to know. Truths that were too dangerous, too disruptive to the carefully curated image of the Morgan family. And I, 10-year-old Rachel, was already beginning to understand the cost of curiosity. Later that evening, I was quieter than usual at dinner. I pushed my food around on the plate, the photo, its fragments, still burning in my thoughts. My father noticed. "Something wrong?" he asked, not kindly, but with that warning tone he always used when he expected a performance. I shook my head. "No, sir." He narrowed his eyes. "Your posture. Straighten up. You're slouching like a slum child." My back snapped straight. Victoria Morgan, seated beside him, smiled at her plate as if she hadn't heard a thing. I nodded mutely. Yes, sir. But something inside me felt hollow. I was 12 when the first punishment came. It was a Sunday morning. Church had just ended, and we were standing outside, mingling with the other affluent DC families. My dress was too tight at the collar. My patent leather shoes pinched, and the sun was beating down on the polished sidewalk. A girl from school, Lacey, had waved and called out, "Hi, Rachel!" She was in jeans, her hair loose and windblown. Without thinking, I'd waved back. My father's hand clamped down on my shoulder like a vice. "What are you doing?" he asked through clenched teeth. I blinked. "She said hi." "She's from the public school. Don't ever associate yourself with those kinds of people in public." I didn't understand what I'd done wrong. That night, after dinner, he called me into his study. The room was dim, the curtains drawn. Books lined the walls, law, policy, economics, but none of them ever felt like they had anything to do with me. He didn't yell. He didn't explain. He simply told me to sit on the floor and wait. Then he turned off the lights, locked the door, and left me there. I cried for the first hour, then I stopped. Tears didn't change anything. I sat in the dark, knees to my chest, wondering if this was how you built character. Wondering why being me was never quite enough. It was raining the night I saw him again. 8 years after the attic, 8 years after the photo was ripped and buried in a trash can, I was 18, fresh into my first year at Georgetown University, and I'd just stormed out of my family's home after yet another argument with my father. I don't remember what sparked it, something about my double major in philosophy and international relations being impractical. What I do remember is the fury in his eyes when I pushed back for the first time. Really pushed back. So I ran out into the storm wearing just a hoodie, jeans, and soaked sneakers. I didn't have a plan, I just walked. After 30 minutes of wandering the slick sidewalks, I ducked under an old awning to catch my breath. The flickering sign above the door read, "Morgan's Books." Below it in smaller letters, Est. 1980, rare finds, honest coffee, quiet shelter. I almost laughed. Quiet shelter sounded like a fantasy. The bell above the door jingled softly as I pushed it open. Warmth hit me like a blanket. The room smelled of cedar, paper, and something like nutmeg. Rows of books stretched high on wooden shelves, the air thick with old stories and quiet patience. Behind a small counter, a man looked up from a yellowing paperback, and my feet stopped moving. It was him. Older now, his beard a little fuller, streaks of grey lining his temples, but those eyes were unmistakable, ice blue, steady, and impossibly kind. My father's face stared back at me without the anger. "You look cold," he said softly, setting down the book. "Sit. I'll make you something warm." He didn't ask my name, didn't ask why I was crying. He just handed me a wool blanket, poured a mug of hot chocolate, and led me to a sagging armchair near the corner fireplace. And I, a girl raised to question every motive and watch every word, said nothing. I just sat. When I finally spoke, it came out like an avalanche. I told him about the pressure, the expectations, the punishments, the suffocating perfection of our family's image. I didn't even know why I was telling him all of it. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. Like every word I said mattered. After I had emptied everything, I looked up, embarrassed. "I don't even know your name," he smiled gently. Jonathan Morgan." The world tilted. I stared at him, heart thudding. "Morgan?" He nodded slowly. "Your father is my twin." I blinked. "But Why don't you? He held up a hand, stopping the question before it spiraled. It's a long story, and I'll tell you, but only if you want to hear it. I did. So I came back. Every month for the next year, I returned to Morgan's books. Sometimes I helped him reshelve inventory or made coffee for the few loyal customers who wandered in. Mostly, we just sat and talked about books, about history, about life, about what it meant to stand for something, even when the world tried to erase you. He never once spoke poorly of my father, not directly, but there was pain there, an old, dignified scar that hadn't fully faded. I learned that he'd started the bookstore on his own after being pushed out of a business deal he once shared with his brother. He didn't go into details, not yet. He just said, "Some truths take time to surface, like ink in water. You'll see it when you're ready." What struck me most was what he didn't say. He never asked for validation, never begged for reconnection. He simply existed in quiet integrity. And with each visit, the foundation of my childhood cracked a little more. Each truth he offered was a gentle chisel, not to destroy, but to set me free. It was the kind of summer afternoon that made asphalt stick to your soles, humid, thick, and annoyingly loud with the buzz of cicadas. I had driven out to Jonathan's bookstore for a delivery run. He'd ordered a batch of out-of-print titles from a small distributor, and I'd offered to help haul them in. As I parked along the curb, my decade-old Honda let out a low groan and then sputtered to silence. I tried the ignition. Nothing. I sighed, leaned back, and stared up at the cloudless sky. The sun already browning my arms through the windshield. Jonathan stepped out of the shop, glanced at the car, and smiled knowingly. That doesn't sound good. Understatement of the year, I muttered, slamming the door as I got out. He waved me inside. "Let's get you a cold drink. I'll call someone." "I can handle a tow. You don't have to." But he was already inside, dialing a number on the old rotary phone he kept purely out of habit. "I know a guy," he said simply. 20 minutes later, a rumbling old tow truck pulled up. The man who stepped out wore oil-streaked jeans, a white tee, and work boots that had seen better years. He was lean, tan, and moved with that slow, methodical confidence of someone who knew his world down to the bolt. He didn't smile when he saw me, just studied the car, then turned to Jonathan. "This the one?" Jonathan nodded. "Rachel, meet Eli Turner, best mechanic this side of the state." "Eli, this is my niece." Eli gave a single nod. "Pleasure." His voice was low and unhurried. He glanced back at the Honda, crouched beside it, and muttered something about timing belt and overdue for mercy. I folded my arms, unsure how to interact with someone who clearly wasn't trying to impress me or intimidated by me. Jonathan disappeared back into the shop, leaving us alone. I crouched nearby, watching him work. "You always this talkative?" I asked dryly. He smirked without looking up. "You always this armoured?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" He finally looked up. And there it was, that look, not flirtatious, not invasive, just direct, honest, unapologetically curious. "You look like you haven't been seen in a while," he said quietly. The words hit harder than they should have, like they'd slipped past every wall I'd built and tapped something raw. I straightened. "I'm seen plenty." Eli wiped his hands on a rag, stood and faced me squarely. There's being looked at, and then there's being seen. I didn't know what to say. Because I had no comeback, no retort, just a growing awareness that for the first time in years, someone wasn't performing for me, or expecting me to perform. We sat on the bookstore steps while the tow truck idled. He handed me a bottle of water from the cooler in his truck bed. "I'll get it to the garage. Should have it back tomorrow." "I'll call a lift. Or I could drive you home," he offered. I raised an eyebrow. "You don't know me." He shrugged. "You're family to Jonathan. That's enough." Another silence, not awkward, just patient. That night, I didn't go home right away. We ended up grabbing burgers from a roadside stand and sitting on the hood of his truck under a blinking street lamp. He told me about his childhood. Raised by a single mom, learned engines by watching YouTube and trial and error. He ran his own garage now, modest business, long hours, no staff. He asked nothing about my family, not once. And I realised I liked that more than I should have, because for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't being treated like Rachel Morgan, daughter of a senator, legacy student of Georgetown, army officer. I was just Rachel. And somehow, that was enough. The next few months moved fast, but not in a reckless, spinning out of control kind of way. It was more like a quiet momentum, a rhythm that made sense the more I leaned into it. Eli and I didn't date in the traditional sense. There were no fancy dinners, no dress codes, no expectations. Just a series of moments that felt unusually real, entirely unforced. We'd meet up after work, sometimes at the bookstore, other times at his garage. He always had a sandwich or a soda ready for me, and I'd help sweep the floors or sort parts just to stay close. Sometimes we didn't speak much, and somehow that never felt like a problem. I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to silence that didn't feel like judgment. One evening, I found him hunched over a workbench in the back of the garage, scribbling on a torn-up notepad. The radio hummed quietly in the background. Classic rock, something with a slow guitar solo. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him. "What's got you so focused?" I asked. He looked up, startled, then smiled. "You ever think about the way military vehicles burn through fuel? It's not just inefficient, it's dangerous. A supply convoy is one of the most vulnerable points in a deployment. You hit the fuel, you cripple the mission." I blinked. "That's true." He turned the notebook toward me. Diagrams, equations, engine schematics I couldn't begin to decode. "I've been working on a high-efficiency battery hybrid," he said. "Something lightweight, durable, self-cooling. If I can get the thermal balance right, it could reduce dependency on resupply by at least 40%. I stared. "You're building battlefield tech in a garage?" Eli shrugged, suddenly sheepish. "I mean, it's not much yet, just theory, but I know it could work." In that moment, I saw him differently. Not just the man who fixed my car or brought me burgers, but someone with fire, with vision, the kind of man who didn't just repair things, he reimagined them. I stepped closer, studying the sketches. "You're not just a mechanic," he glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Depends who's asking," I smiled. "I'm not asking for anyone else," he exhaled. "Then yeah, I guess I'm not." A week later, we had our first official date, if you could call it that. He set up a small charcoal grill behind the garage, laid out 2 folding chairs, and brought out a plate of seasoned ribs that smelled like heaven. I showed up with a 6-pack of local beer and 0 expectations. We grilled, we ate, we laughed. He told me about growing up in a tiny town where ambition meant inheriting the family gas station. He told me about his mum, how she taught him to use a wrench before he could drive, how she kept a notebook of every customer's name and birthday. I told him about combat training, about Afghanistan, about the way loss didn't always hit you like a bullet, Sometimes it just crept in, night after night, until you didn't know what peace felt like anymore. He didn't pity me. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened, really listened. And when the night got cold, he handed me his jacket and didn't say a word when I kept it for a week. I should have known I was falling for him the night he found me sitting in my car outside the garage, staring blankly at the steering wheel. I'd just come from a family dinner. My father had made a public joke at my expense, something about females in uniform being decorative at best. My mother had smiled politely. Vanessa had sipped her wine. I didn't say anything. I never did. But afterward, I drove straight to Eli's garage. I didn't plan it. I didn't even know why. He tapped on my window. "Bad night?" I nodded. He didn't press, just opened the door and waited. Inside, he handed me a grilled cheese and a Coke. No words, just kindness. That night, as I leaned against the cool metal of the workbench, watching him tune an engine with steady hands, I felt it. Love. Not the desperate kind, not the performative kind, the kind that felt safe. And that scared the hell out of me, because I knew deep down that if my father ever found out, he wouldn't just disapprove. He'd destroy it. It had been exactly 7 days since Eli and I stood in that chapel. 7 days since I sent the photo. 7 days since I turned off my phone and decided to stop apologising for the life I chose. I was in the garage that morning, watching Eli tinker with a prototype battery mount. When the Mercedes pulled up, it didn't fit. The sleek, obsidian black vehicle gleamed against the dusty gravel of our driveway like a predator that had wandered too far from its natural habitat. The door opened, and out stepped Vanessa. Her heels sank slightly into the soft dirt, but she didn't react. She smoothed her white silk blouse, adjusted her oversized sunglasses, and hoisted a massive gift basket from the passenger seat. It was wrapped in glistening cellophane and tied with an unnecessarily large gold bow. She looked like a catalogue ad for Rich Sister Visits the Country. I didn't move, neither did Eli. She spotted us and smiled, tight, polished, performative. "Am I interrupting?" she called out. "No," I said, but it came out flat. She strutted across the drive, each step carefully measured. "Well, this is charming." Eli stayed silent, wiping his hands on a rag as he leaned against the hood of a half-disassembled truck. Vanessa extended the basket toward me. "A little something from Mum and Dad." I didn't take it. "Dean and DeLuca," she added, as if the brand name might soften my resolve. "Your favourite cheeses, and those rosemary crackers you liked as a kid." I finally took the basket just to stop her from holding it out like a shield. It was heavier than it looked. She looked around the garage, eyes scanning the shelves, the oil stains, the cluttered workbenches. "So this is where the magic happens, huh?" I said nothing. She turned to Eli and offered a hand. "You must be Eli. It's wonderful to finally meet you." He took her hand briefly. "Likewise." Vanessa turned back to me, her smile a little too bright. "So, listen, things have been chaotic. Dad's been under a lot of pressure. There was a vote on defence funding, and the press has been sniffing around ever since the contract announcement." I raised an eyebrow. "And this has to do with my wedding because..." She pressed her lips together, regrouped. "They want to host a celebration, a proper one, for you and Eli at the house in Georgetown. You know, something classy, a real welcome into the family." My laugh came out before I could stop it. "A do-over?" She winced slightly. "Come on, Rach, you know they didn't handle it well, but they're trying." "Trying to do what exactly?" I asked, arms crossed. Vanessa looked at Eli briefly, then lowered her voice. Dad wants to talk business with Eli. There's potential. You two have something real here. It makes sense to merge forces, present a united front. And there it was. The reason for the visit, the basket, the drive, the fake smile. It wasn't an olive branch. It was bait. I glanced at Eli. He looked calm, but I could tell by the way his jaw tightened, the way his foot subtly shifted. He was reading every subtext, every game. Vanessa stepped closer, lowering her voice. Look, Rachel, it's better for everyone if the family's interests are aligned. You know how Dad is. He can't stand the idea of an outsider running something so important. That word, outsider, it hung in the air like smoke. I tilted my head. What exactly is he running? Vanessa's eyes flicked away, just for a second. Just everything, the brand, the legacy, it all has to look cohesive. She didn't realise she'd said too much, but I did. Eli did too. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't about reconciliation. It was about control. I held the basket up slightly. Tell them thanks. Vanessa seemed relieved. So, you'll think about the dinner? I'll think about it, I said, but I didn't mean it the way she hoped. She walked back to the Mercedes, clearly eager to leave the dust and diesel behind. You know, Rach, she called over her shoulder, you could have had a life with all of this, without the garage grease and DIY weddings. I didn't answer. She got into the car, turned on the engine, and drove away, without looking back. Eli stepped beside me, watching the trail of expensive perfume disappear down the road. You okay? He asked. I looked at the basket in my hands. I don't know what scares me more. The fact that they're suddenly nice. Or that they think this will work. He smiled faintly. They don't know who they're dealing with. I looked at him then, really looked. And I knew he was right. That night, after Vanessa's visit, I couldn't sleep. Her words clung to me like static. Outsider running something so important. Merge forces. Present a united front. They weren't just passive phrases. They were strategy. Family speak for acquisition. Control. I paced the length of the living room while Eli sipped coffee at the kitchen counter, watching me. Finally, I stopped in front of him. There's something you're not telling me. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. He set the mug down, the clink louder than it needed to be. Come with me. We walked out into the garage. The place was dimly lit, cluttered in the way only a working shop could be. But Eli didn't stop there. He led me past the tool benches, through a narrow hallway I'd always assumed was storage. At the end was a steel door with a keypad. He punched in a code I'd never seen him use before. The lock released with a soft hiss. The room on the other side was nothing like the rest of the garage. It was pristine, clinical almost. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Sleek work tables lined the walls, covered with circuit boards, 3D printed components, and a series of battery arrays glowing softly with blue light. On one screen, schematics rotated in slow motion, a lightweight energy core for military-grade vehicles. What is this? I whispered. He exhaled. My real work. I turned to him. Eli, what? My name is Elijah Turner, he said evenly. I'm the founder and CEO of ET Dynamics. The world tilted. I stared at him, trying to connect the dots. ET, as in the defense tech company that just won the Pentagon contract? He nodded once. We outbid every major player, including Vancorp. Vancorp, my father's crown jewel, the company he'd spent years nurturing through lobbying, handshakes, and backdoor deals. I swallowed. You beat him. Eli looked at me, not smug, not proud, just calm. Not intentionally, we had the better tech. The DoD saw that. and I walked deeper into the room, absorbing everything: the quiet whir of servers, the smell of ozone and solder, the carefully organised chaos that hid a revolution. "You've had this all along?" "Yes. And you didn't tell me?" He took a step forward. "Rachel, I didn't hide it to manipulate you. I hid it to protect you." "From what?" "From exactly what's happening now," he said. "From your family using you as leverage. From them turning us, into another transaction." I ran a hand through my hair. Vanessa didn't come here to make peace. She came because they know who you are. He nodded. "They've known for weeks, but the photo, Jonathan being in it, that's what triggered the panic. He's their loose end, their buried story." "And I'm the rope between you and him," I said bitterly, "the connector they think they can tug on." "They don't understand that you're not tug-of-war rope," Eli said gently. "You're the one holding the scissors?" I let out a breath I hadn't realised I'd been holding. All those years of being controlled, shaped, polished. And now I was the threat. I looked around the room again. "This is incredible." "It's just the beginning," Eli replied. "We're going to change how the military powers its missions. Cleaner, faster, safer. No more blood for fuel." He walked over to a bench, picked up a small palm-sized cube. "This powers an entire recon drone for 22 hours. Silent, cold, untraceable." I took it, felt the weight of it in my hand. It wasn't just metal, it was legacy, but not my father's. Eli watched me closely. "If this is too much, if you need time—" "I don't," I said firmly. "I just needed the truth." He nodded slowly. "You have it. All of it." And in that moment, I realised something terrifying and empowering at once. My family hadn't just underestimated Eli, they'd underestimated me. The Morgan estate in Georgetown was as polished and performative as I remembered. The manicured lawn hadn't grown an inch out of place since I was a teenager. The columns still loomed white and perfect, flanking a door designed to intimidate more than welcome. Everything about this house whispered power and warned you not to touch anything. Eli and I walked in side by side. Jonathan came with us, dressed in his usual muted browns and soft tweed, completely unbothered by the absurd grandeur around him. I, on the other hand, felt the walls pulse with old ghosts. Victoria Morgan greeted us first, gliding down the grand staircase in a dove-grey sheath dress and pearls so polished they looked unnatural. She wore her smile like a surgical mask, sanitized and sterile. "Darling," she said, reaching for my cheek with an air kiss that missed by inches. "Mother," I replied flatly. Her gaze slid over to Eli. "So pleased you could make it. The press will be thrilled." I raised an eyebrow. "Tut, press?" "Oh, no interviews," she said quickly. "But you know how things leak. It's always best to manage the narrative." We were barely 2 steps into the foyer, and the performance had begun. Vanessa swept in next, arms open. "You made it!" I resisted the urge to recoil. "Of course." She turned to Eli, giving him a long, appraising look. "You clean up nicely." Eli smiled politely. "I hear that a lot. From mechanics mostly." Before anyone could respond, my father entered. Edward Morgan, dressed in tailored navy and his signature red tie, walked like a man entering a courtroom he already owned. He moved with power, born not of kindness or wisdom, but entitlement, the certainty that no one could touch him. "Rachel," he said, nodding like I was a constituent. "Dad," he turned to Eli. "Mr. Turner, I've heard fascinating things." Eli extended his hand. "We try to keep it boring." Edward chuckled. "But you don't, which is exactly why we should talk." Dinner was served in the formal dining room, mahogany table, crystal glasses, candles too tall to be practical. The air smelled of roasted lamb and manipulation. Conversation was light, scripted. My mother asked about weather in Texas. Vanessa gushed about new art installations. My father asked nothing. He just studied us like a chessboard. After dessert, he finally leaned forward. "Well," he said, clasping his hands, "let's get to the reason we're all here." Eli sat straighter. I stayed still. "I've reviewed your patents," my father began, turning to Eli. "Impressive, very. And your technology, it has real legs, real military application." "Thank you," Eli said calmly. Edward nodded. "Which is why I'd like to propose a strategic partnership. Vancorp has the infrastructure, the clearance, the reach. You have the innovation. Together we could—" "No," Eli said. The room fell still. My father blinked. "I'm sorry?" Eli leaned forward, folding his hands. "We're not looking for partners." Edward let out a dry laugh. "Everyone says that until they realize how difficult it is to scale in defense. You'll need lobbyists, political cover, the real game. That's where I come in." Eli didn't flinch. "And that's exactly why I built ET Dynamics, to change the game, not play by it." My father's face didn't move, but something flickered behind his eyes. He looked at me. "Rachel, talk some sense into him." I met his gaze squarely. "You brought us here for a business deal, not reconciliation. That tells me everything I need to know." He exhaled sharply through his nose. "You always were dramatic." "No," I said, standing. "I just finally learned how to see the script." Jonathan stood too, silent but firm beside us. Eli rose last. Edward watched us all, expression unreadable. "This is a mistake," he said. "You'll regret this." Eli's voice was quiet but sharp. "The only regret I'd have is trusting you." And with that, we walked out of the house of Morgan for the last time. We hadn't even reached the foyer when his voice rang out, cold and sharp. "Don't you dare walk away from me!" I stopped mid-stride. Eli turned, slow and calm. I turned too, but not because he ordered it. Because I needed to look him in the eye one more time and finally, irrevocably, burn the illusion to ash. My father stormed into the room, his tie loosened now, the public persona slipping. Behind him, my mother hovered, her fingers clutched around a silk napkin like it might save her from drowning. Edward's face was flushed, eyes burning. "You," he spat at me, "you've always been the weak link, always the one with opinions, emotions, shame, and now this, you bring that man," he pointed at Eli, "into my house, humiliate this family, reject everything I've built." "What you built," I interrupted, "was a cage. You just furnished it with good china." He ignored me. "You could have had power, legacy, but no, you had to throw it all away for grease-stained idealism." I stepped closer, my voice steady. "No. I walked away because I finally understood that none of it was real, not the legacy, not the values, not even this family." "You ungrateful," he began, but I cut him off. "No, you don't get to play the betrayed father, not after what you did to me." He paused, startled. "What I did?" I turned toward the others. "Let's talk about what he did." Silence fell heavy over the polished marble floor. I looked at Vanessa first. Her expression was unreadable. Then at my mother, whose mouth was pressed into a thin, familiar line of denial. "I was 12 when he locked me in his study for 3 hours. Because I waved at the wrong girl in public." My mother flinched. "I was 16 when he hit me with a leather belt. Because I got a B+ in history." "That's not true," she whispered, barely audible. I spun on her. "Isn't it?" "Because I remember the sound of you setting the table while I cried upstairs." I remember the way you turned the TV louder so you wouldn't hear. Her eyes welled up. Don't, I said. Don't cry now. You had years to speak up, but you chose peace. That's not fair, she began. Silence is also a choice. I said, in Vietnamese, the only non-English phrase I'd learned from a fellow soldier years ago, it means silence is also a choice. She staggered back a step, like the words had slapped her harder than Edward ever had. He was staring at me now, the fight draining from his eyes, replaced with something colder, something more calculating. You have no proof, he said flatly. I smiled and took out my phone. Actually, I said, opening the voice memos app, I do. The room went still. You see, I recorded our conversation earlier tonight. You making your offer to Eli, the way you dismiss my career, the veiled threats, all of it. Vanessa's eyes widened. Rachel, I kept going. I also have old journals, photos of bruises, screenshots of messages, and the name of the housekeeper who walked in once and begged me not to tell anyone what she saw. I turned to my father, locking eyes. You built your empire on the illusion of integrity, but I don't need to expose you. I raised the phone, still open. You've already done it yourself. He stepped forward, fury flaring again. You think anyone will believe you over me? I think the truth doesn't need belief, I said. It just needs air. He reached for the phone. Eli stepped between us in a single, silent motion. His presence was like a wall, calm, immovable. You're done, I said. The senator, the father, the myth, all of it. And then I handed the phone, not to my father, not to my mother, but to Jonathan. Because I knew what would come next wouldn't be mine to carry. He nodded once, tucked the phone into his jacket, and walked past Edward like he was smoke. The first headline dropped 3 days later. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. I was sitting on the back steps of the garage, coffee in hand, watching Eli run diagnostics on a new battery prototype when my phone vibrated with a notification. Washington Post exclusive, Senator Morgan under fire, allegations of unethical defense, lobbying surface. I stared at the screen for a moment, the headline burning itself into my retinas. Then another alert, then another. Internal memo links Morgan's office to defense contract pressure. Politico. Anonymous source confirms attempted hostile acquisition of ET Dynamics. CNN. The floodgates had opened, and the tide wasn't stopping. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Front page features, segment leads. Analysts breaking down years of quiet manoeuvring, backroom deals, and carefully concealed connections between my father's office and multiple defence contractors, including Vancorp, the very company now exposed for trying to strong-arm a government contract they lost fair and square. The reporters were merciless. They cited insider testimonies, internal communications, a paper trail that suggested not only unethical behaviour, but a years-long pattern of using family connections for political and financial gain. And threading through every article, every panel discussion, every radio call-in and comment thread was one name. Mine, not in accusation, not in scandal, but in curiosity. Why did Major Rachel Morgan sever ties with her father before the deal broke? Did she know? Is she the whistleblower? My inbox filled with interview requests. Every network you could name, morning shows, late-night pundits, international press, wanted me on camera. To explain, to clarify, to confess, or to confirm. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't respond to emails. I didn't return calls. I simply watched the fire spread from a safe distance, warm coffee in hand, while Eli worked beside me in steady silence. The truth had its own momentum now. It no longer needed me to push it forward. And in that silence, something powerful began to take shape. My refusal to speak became the story. My silence became a statement, not a denial, not a cover-up, a quiet, unwavering declaration that I had nothing to defend because everything was already being exposed. That week, news anchors replayed footage of my father from earlier interviews, dissecting his tone, his posture, his evasions. His carefully curated image began to unravel. The man who once commanded full control of every room he entered now appeared unsure, contradictory, cornered. Speculation turned into pressure. Pressure turned into panic. And then the walls began to crack. A junior staffer resigned and released a statement implicating Morgan in manipulating DoD contract briefings. Another anonymously confirmed that he had referred to ET dynamics as a threat to stability, a phrase that now echoed like a confession, and still I said nothing. I stayed in Texas, went to work, cleaned battery housings with Eli, took long walks with Jonathan, and made no public comment. Reporters flew in anyway. They camped outside the garage. They approached me at the grocery store. One even tried to pose as a client, asking for a tune-up. I said nothing, not out of fear, but because the truth was louder than I'd ever been allowed to be, and it was finally speaking for itself. One morning, Eli handed me a print copy of The Atlantic. On the cover was a silhouette of my father, slightly blurred, with the title, The End of Image, How Edward Morgan Fell on His Own Sword. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The photo said it all. A man who built his entire life on perception, now buried by it. That night, as the sun set in streaks of orange and purple, I sat with Jonathan on the bookstore porch. He sipped tea from a ceramic mug that looked older than me. I was quiet, watching cicadas flicker in the trees. "You've been quiet," he said, not unkindly. I nodded. He looked at me, eyes soft. "And that silence has done more damage than 1,000 speeches." I exhaled slowly. "It's not revenge." He smiled. "I know. That's what makes it beautiful." For the first time in years, I felt no guilt. No need to explain or justify. Just peace. The kind that comes when you stop shouting to be believed and let the truth echo instead. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday. No return address, no stamp, just my name in delicate cursive script I hadn't seen in years. Victoria Morgan. I turned it over in my hands 12 times before I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of thick stationery, the family crest, embossed in gold, in the corner, now feeling like a fossil. The letter was short, stripped of flourish. For once, her words didn't read like a prepared statement. "Rachel, I've left your father. There's nothing I can say that would deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just need you to know I was wrong about everything." V, I read it 3 times, then I folded it back neatly and slid it into my desk drawer. 3 days later, I agreed to meet her. We picked a cafe in a neutral town between DC and Texas. No headlines, no bodyguards, just a small brick coffee shop with ivy growing along the side, and the smell of cinnamon buns clinging to the air. She was already there when I arrived, sitting outside, hunched slightly over a mug, staring into the foam like it held the answer to a test she was destined to fail. I almost didn't recognise her. The hair was different, not coloured, not styled. Her roots were grey. She wore no makeup, no pearls, just a faded sweater and jeans I hadn't seen since my teens. When she looked up, her eyes were bare. No performance, no veneer, just my mother, not the public figure, not the ice sculpture hostess, a woman. "Rachel," she said quietly, as if testing whether she still had permission to use my name. I sat. I didn't speak. She folded her hands on the table, then unfolded them. You look healthy. You look different. She gave a tiny nod. I feel different. A waitress came. We both ordered tea. It arrived in silence. We sipped in silence. For a long time we just sat with it. Then she spoke. I let it happen, she said, still staring at her mug. All of it. The control, the punishments, the isolation. I saw it. I knew it. And I did nothing. I said nothing. I told myself I was protecting the family, that if I kept the peace, you'd survive it, that it was better than chaos. It wasn't peace, I said, finally. It was compliance. She nodded slowly. I know that now. She looked up, eyes glassy, but dry. I'm sorry, Rachel. Not because I got caught. Not because it's convenient, because I broke something in you. And you had to rebuild yourself without me. That landed like a stone in my chest. I looked at her, at this woman who'd chosen silence over my pain, pearls over my bruises. And now here she was, stripped bare, finally choosing honesty. And maybe that was enough. I forgive you, I said softly. Her eyes widened. You do? But, I continued, this doesn't mean we go back. There won't be dinners, holidays, reunions. I can't pretend we're a family. That version of us is dead. She nodded again, slowly. I didn't expect anything. I need boundaries, I said. If you can respect that, we can rebuild. Carefully, slowly. I will. Another silence, softer now. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small folded piece of newspaper, an article already creased and worn. It was the first story about the Morgan scandal, the one that started the firestorm. I leaked it, she said, placing it between us. The documents, the financial trail, the anonymous source in the report. It was me. I stared at her. I didn't do it for revenge, she said quickly. I did it because I saw what he was about to do to you, to Eli, to the man you love, and I knew this was the only way to stop it. My breath caught in my throat. Do you know what it cost me? She asked, smiling faintly. Everything. Status, friends, the townhouse. He said I was dead to him, and for once I didn't beg him to forgive me. I reached out and touched the article. You ended it, I said. She nodded. I helped you walk away. Just like I should have years ago. Tears welled in my eyes, not from pain, but from the strange relief of finally being seen. I'm not coming back, I whispered. She reached for my hand but stopped halfway. I know. And somehow that was enough. Not a happy ending, but an honest one. 5 years later, the mornings in Texas were still quiet. The sun rose slow and golden across the pine trees, casting long, gentle shadows across our backyard. You could hear the birds before the coffee finished brewing, and that, for me, was peace. I still wore the uniform, still reported for duty, but something had changed. I no longer wore it like armour. I didn't need to prove anything anymore, to anyone. Especially not to the ghosts of a house in Georgetown. Eli still ran the garage, at least on paper. In reality, most of his time now was split between managing ET Dynamics and working with engineers across the country on a new generation of clean military tech. He still kept his name off the website, still wore the same old boots, still grilled burgers like they were gourmet. Our house wasn't grand, a single-story ranch with a wide porch and a crooked mailbox, but it was full of laughter, of comfort, of freedom, and of Noah, our son, 4 years old, wild curls, big eyes, more questions than the sky has stars. That morning, I was on the living room rug with him, surrounded by a minefield of Lego bricks. He was building what he claimed was a hyperspace rescue vehicle, but looked suspiciously like a half-melted toaster. He furrowed his brow, struggling to force a blue piece into a red frame that clearly didn't match. His little hands trembled, his jaw clenched. "It's not working," he muttered. "It's stupid." He threw the brick down, fist clenched, and for a split second, I was back in my father's study. The polished wood, the cold stare, the silence after a wrong answer, the shame for needing help. The programming was there, waiting, the old instinct to snap, to correct, to crush. But I took a breath, and I knelt beside him. "It's not stupid," I said gently. "It's just tricky. You're figuring it out. That takes time." He looked up at me, eyes wide, the anger softening just enough. I picked up the piece. "Want to look at it together?" He nodded. We worked on it side by side, and when the final piece clicked into place, he grinned like he'd just invented space travel. "See," I said, "you did it." He threw his arms around my neck. "You're the best helper, Mommy." I held him tighter than I needed to, because in that moment I realized the war I had fought wasn't just about escaping my past. It was about rewriting it, one gentle moment at a time. Later that afternoon, we drove out to Jonathan's bookstore. It hadn't changed much except for the small bronze plaque now displayed in the front window. The Jonathan Morgan Scholarship Fund, Building Future Innovators. After the scandal, after the collapse, after the dust settled, Jonathan had taken the settlement money Edward was legally forced to pay and turned it into a gift for the next generation. Every year, the fund gave full-ride scholarships to first-generation engineering students, especially those from military families or underserved backgrounds. Noah didn't understand all of that yet, but he loved the bookstore. He'd sit for hours in the kids' corner, flipping through picture books while I drank tea with Jonathan in the back. That day, Jonathan was on the porch, rocking slowly in his favourite chair. He looked older, sure, more lines, more grey, but also lighter, like the weight he'd carried for decades had finally lifted. Noah ran ahead and climbed into his lap without hesitation. "Grandpa Jay," he said, proudly showing off the finished Lego ship. Jonathan examined it with exaggerated seriousness. "This is clearly a top-tier prototype. Did you install hyperdrive?" Noah giggled. "Yes, and pizza launchers." "Ah, essential," Jonathan said gravely. I sat on the steps watching them, heart full. This was the family I had chosen, not one bound by blood, but by healing, by intention, the kind you build brick by brick, mistake by mistake, and love by love. The legacy my father tried to control had crumbled into scandal and headlines. But the legacy we were building, it flew quietly under the radar, and it was changing the world. The backyard was full of light that evening, warm, honey-coloured, stretching long shadows across the grass as the sun slipped behind the trees. We'd strung up lights around the porch, just simple bulbs glowing like fireflies. Eli stood at the grill, flipping burgers with one hand, a beer in the other. Jonathan leaned against the railing, telling Noah a story about a rocket powered by cheese, which, from the look on my son's face, might as well have been gospel. And then there was my mother. Victoria Morgan, now just Victoria, sat in a folding chair with a cup of lemonade and a straw hat shielding her eyes. She looked out of place, but not uncomfortable. She had traded pearls for simplicity, tailored coats for soft cardigans. There was something raw and new in her presence. She didn't try to host. She didn't try to lead. She just was. And Vanessa? She arrived late, pulling into the driveway in a used hatchback with a dented door and a squeaky brake. Gone were the designer heels and sculpted waves. She wore jeans, sneakers, and no trace of pretense. "Sorry I'm late," she said, hugging me quickly. "You're here, that's enough," I replied. She brought a bag of groceries, her contribution, not because she had to, because she wanted to. After everything collapsed, Vanessa didn't run back to Edward. She got an apartment in Charlotte, took a job in a non-profit doing administrative work. She told me once it was the first time she'd ever made her own money, paid her own rent. The pride in her voice still made my chest ache. She didn't talk much about the past, neither did I. Some wounds didn't need words, they just needed time, space, and choice, and we had all chosen to be here, a family, but not the kind you inherit, the kind you create. We ate on mismatched plates. There were too many condiments, not enough napkins, and someone had burned the corn. Noah was sticky with ketchup, Eli's shirt had mustard on it, and Jonathan had forgotten to bring forks. But no one raised their voice. No one looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. After dinner, we sat in a circle of lawn chairs, passing around slices of peach cobbler. Vanessa played with Noah's curls, laughing when he called her Aunt V in mock seriousness. My mother listened quietly, smiling at the way he talked like he ruled the world. Jonathan passed me a fresh cup of tea and said, "You did it, kid." I looked at him, confused. "This," he said, gesturing around. "You built this." And in that moment, I saw it for what it was, a family, not curated or edited or scripted for donors and votes, just us, scarred, flawed, healing. Eli caught my gaze from across the yard, and for a second, the noise fell away. The years collapsed inward. I remembered standing in that chapel, alone, watching two empty chairs meant for people who never came, feeling like I had no place left to belong. And now Noah ran barefoot through the grass, shrieking with laughter. Vanessa offered to do dishes. My mother wiped her hands on a paper towel and didn't ask permission to stay longer. Jonathan read aloud from a dog-eared book under the porch light. I didn't need validation. I didn't need titles. I had built a home from the ashes of rejection, and not just for me, for all of us. I walked to the edge of the yard, the stars just beginning to blink into existence, and I whispered to the wind a truth that had taken me a lifetime to claim. I was erased by my bloodline, but I became the blueprint for a family that heals.